Good evening and welcome to the Township of Woolwich Committee of the Whole meeting on Monday, January 23rd, 2023. We are now live on YouTube. I will now do a roll call of council. I, Councillor Burgess, am present and chairing this meeting. Mayor Shantz.
Here.
Councillor Bryant.
Present.
Councillor Cadeau.
Present.
Councillor Grant.
Present.
Councillor Schwint.
Present.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge the land on which we live has been here from time immemorial, and that Indigenous people have lived here from the time immemorial. I thank the Attawaddaron, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee people who have lived here and cared for this land, and who continue to share and steward this land with us. May we together learn to care for each other, our flora and fauna, and the land that sustains us. Do any council members have any declarations of pecuniary interest?
I'd like to declare a conflict of interest on 10.3, the Trinity United Church application.
Great, thank you. There are no items to come forward from closed session. Now on to public meetings. The following portion of the meeting is for information only, and no decisions will be made tonight. Any questions can be directed to Development Services staff following the meeting. I declare the planning public meeting to be open. We have a zone change application for James Bauman tonight. And we have Manager of Planning, Jeremy Vink, with us to provide council with an overview of his report. Go ahead, Mr. Vink.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of council and the public. This is Zone Change 1 2023 for James K. Bauman. It's the property located at 6918 Middlebrook Road in the Township of Woolwich. The property is designated countryside, prime agricultural, and environmental protection natural hazard areas. That property is currently zoned agricultural. The applicant is proposing to amend the agricultural zoning with site-specific provisions. Specifically, they wish to allow an agricultural related use on the property, being the repair of agricultural equipment and the fabrication and painting of the farm equipment. All this is to take place within a 1.2 hectare area of operation. In addition to this, the applicant has proposed in their draft bylaw to regulate the size, height of the structures, where the outdoor storage will be located, and to reduce the number of required parking spaces from 41 spaces to 19. The applicant's proposed draft bylaw is attached to the report tonight, just for reference for council to take a look at. The applicant is here along with their planning consultant, RBA Planning, which is Bob Black, and will be giving a bit of a further opening and discussion about the application. If there's any questions, staff is available to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Vink. Council, are there any questions for Mr. Vink about his report? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Vink. We'll now hear from Bob Black of RBA Planning, who is representing the applicant. Mr. Black, please turn on your microphone and begin when you are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Bob Black and I'm with RBA Planning Consultants Limited here in Elmira, and I have been retained by Mr. Bauman to proceed with a rezoning application to amend the agricultural zone to establish a site-specific agricultural related use on his farm. Jeremy has outlined to you the official plan and zoning designation of the property, and it is our submission that the proposed use is an agriculturally related use as defined in the provincial policy statements, and it is located on an operating farm, and the manufacturing and repair of liquid manure spreaders and other farm equipment and machinery is a use that supports agriculture. I have attached to this submission a number of figures and appendices from my planning justification report in support of this request that I'd like to review by asking the committee members to refer to, firstly, figure 1, which is the location of the subject property, outlining the property boundary within the Township of Woolwich. It shows the areas of environmental protection in the wooded area to the rear of the property, and the gully to the south is the regulated area by the Grand River Conservation Authority. It also shows a farm to the south that the Baumans also own and use as part of their farming operation. It's the property with the miniature castle on it that committee members may be familiar with. Figure 2 is a site plan of existing features that exist today. A driveway from Middlebrook Road past a single-family farmhouse to the farm shed, of which that shed has now been converted to a shop for the repair, manufacturing, and painting of farm equipment. The business in the shop is called Middlebrook Welding and Manufacturing, and its main business is liquid manure spreaders, along with fixing other farm equipment. The large livestock barn with a capacity for 150 farrow to finish hogs exists. Outside storage areas for the farm machinery repair and parts are also identified. The following figures provide an explanation of the process the Baumans went through to finally decide on a suitable location for the agriculture-related use or the shop to be located. You turn to figure 3, it considers an addition to the existing converted shed to a shop and parking to support the use. After an analysis of the required upgrades to meet today's building code requirements for an industrial building, the cost made it economically impractical to proceed. And if they did, and in the end, they would still have an upgraded farm machinery shed. Figure 4 then considered a new shop south of the farmhouse and the barn, fronting Middlebrook Road. The site plan proposes a new access road from Middlebrook Road, car parking in front of the new building next to Middlebrook Road, and outside storage to the west and south of the building next to the GRCA road regulated area. After much consideration, it was decided not to proceed with this proposal based on the extensive amount of lot grading next to the regulated area that would be required to regulate the site, the requirement for retaining walls along the southerly boundary, and the rural impact of an industrial type building right next to Middlebrook Road, and in fact in view of a new house that's being built immediately across Middlebrook Road. Figure 5 then identifies a new shop proposal west of the barn and west of an existing row of mature maple trees. This site plan was then submitted to the Township Planning Department for pre-consultation circulation prior to us finalizing our planning application and submission. Through this process that the Planning Department has, an archaeological investigation was identified as being required for the building site. Garth Grimes of Dietrich Consulting Limited completed the investigation and found no artifacts, and he has sent his report and findings to the ministry as they are required to do so. In addition, Township staff had a number of issues that were raised and subsequently addressed in our planning justification report. However, as a result, the plan in Figure 5 was refined with minor revisions to that is found in Figure 6. There, the site plan has shifted the parking area to allow the building to shift easterly, leaving more land with the farm. Also, the outside storage areas were shifted northerly and west of the existing shop, and the parking spaces were reduced to leave more agricultural land with the farming operation. The new access from Middlebrook Road is retained. The major benefit to this location is that it retains the rural character of the agricultural community. It is completely screened from Middlebrook Road and from the new house across the road, leaving the farm cluster as it currently is when one drives by on Middlebrook Road. Appendix 7 provides the committee with pictures of the manure spreaders, the liquid manure spreaders manufactured, repaired, and painted at Middlebrook Welding. This machinery is very large and long. The tires themselves are over 6 feet high, and the units are 11 to 12 feet high. and 45 to 50 feet long. With a large dual four-wheel drive tractor to pull these units, they are not meant for driving through residential areas. They are better on rural roads away from traffic in urbanized settlements and located on a farm, particularly where access is easy 24/7 in case of breakdowns throughout the day or the night. In Appendix 6, it provides a list of customers that rely on Gembrook Welding to repair their farm machinery and liquid manure spreaders. This indicates the community support and a requirement for this use to continue in a new building that will meet the current building codes in the rural community. In addition, it will also be required to pay the applicable development fees and charges. Appendix 3 provides pictures of typical agricultural buildings in the community, similar to the one being proposed on the Bauman farm. In closing, this planning application to introduce site-specific zoning regulations are found in the draft zoning bylaw to introduce an agriculture-related use in Figure 6, we submit, is appropriate for a number of reasons. Firstly, the repair, manufacturing, welding, and painting of farm equipment, in particular liquid manure spreaders, is an agricultural-related use that supports agriculture and the agricultural community. It meets the PPS definition for an agriculture-related use located on a farm. Secondly, the rural character of the agricultural community as one drives by the property is completely retained, and through site plan control, the use and the buildings will be suitably screened and the farm building cluster maintained. Thirdly, the new access to Middlebrook Road has been reviewed and approved by Township Engineering and is acceptable to accommodate large farm equipment and trucks for the shop and the farming operation. The new shop building and associated uses will take up limited agricultural land, but not to make the farm operation unviable, nor the livestock barn unusable. Fifthly, the agricultural-related use is one that supports agriculture by producing employment for the local community, and it is appropriately located for those using horse and buggies to travel to work, using rural roads on a farm with a barn for their horses to be stabled in. Appropriate rural services can be provided, such as water, a septic system, hydro, a fire reservoir. Natural gas is intended to be extended next year across the front of the property. And if necessary, any Ministry of the Environment approvals for painting can be provided. Lastly, the rural location on the Bauman farm is ideal for the Baumans to provide 24/7 emergency repairs that happens day or night to be ready for the next day's work that is critical for farmers dealing with weather fluctuations and limited time frames to complete harvest. I'd like to leave my address at this point, and perhaps if there are questions, I or Mr. Bauman, who is listening, will try and address them for you. Thank you very much for this opportunity to address you.
Thank you, Mr. Black. Are there any questions for him from council? Mayor Shantz?
Thank you, through you to Mr. Black, I think. So the amount of work that's going on here won't increase considerably over what it is now. My real question is about any noise related issues that may have come up in the past. I don't know of any, and so I'm wondering if you can speak to the noise that might or might not happen with this.
Sure. This operation started in about 2008, so it's been going for about 15 years now. And to date, we are not aware of any noise complaints from anybody in the rural community. The proposal that we have will turn the existing shop back into a machinery or hay shed as it was originally built for, and move it farther away from Middlebrook Road and farther away from most surrounding uses. So we don't envisage any noise impact situations that might arise from this particular use.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bryant.
Thank you. Through you to Mr. Black. You mentioned there was a new house being built across the road from that business. Have they been contacted as to any issues they may have?
I believe the Baumanns have visited with them and discussed the fact that this rezoning would be proceeding. And it's one of the main factors that the use was moved away from Middlebrook Road because of that view line that they would have. It would change from an open field to a parking lot in front of an industrial building. And because the policies strive to retain the rural character of the agricultural community, was one of the reasons, maybe not the only one, but one of the reasons that the Baumanns decided that it should be moved further west behind the existing mature screen of evergreen trees. So I was not involved with the Baumanns when they met with the property owner across the road, so I can't elaborate on that at all for you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Council? Councillor Schmidt?
Not sure this would be the applicant or to staff actually. Would any further tree requirements or site plan grading that's part of the site plan agreement, or is that something part of this application at this point?
It's part of the application process that we'll be proceeding through. It will be followed by the approval of the zoning bylaw. That would be the next step, is to enter into and finalize our site plan and enter into a site plan agreement with the municipality that will be registered on title to control the area of operation, the size of the building, the number of parking spaces. In addition, when we do the site plan, we would be at that point then do a detailed site grading and drainage plan to show how it will be graded. The GRCA has already indicated that they feel there is no necessity for a stormwater management pond, which would take up more agricultural land. We would probably be proposing a 30-meter buffer along the southerly boundary that would be left in hay or grass as a bit of a way to mitigate any impacts that might happen. So the site plan process is fairly extensive. Jeremy can elaborate on it and ties up the applicant as to what he can and cannot do. And that will be the next step after the approval of the zoning bylaw.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, Mr. Baumann, is there anything you would like to add? If you're still on the line there.
I think you have to press *6.
Yes. No, there's nothing that I need to add at this moment.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Baumann? All right, thank you guys for your time. I will now ask the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I will now ask the clerk if there are any unregistered participants in the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, there are no unregistered participants this evening.
Thank you, Clerk Smith. Since this item was for information only and there are no further speakers, I declare the planning public meeting to be closed. Tonight, there are no presentations, no delegations, and no unfinished business. So we go on to consent items. Before we pass a motion receiving the consent agenda for information, does anyone on council wish to remove any items for further discussion? All right, that the following consent items be received for information. Updating 2023 council meeting schedule with televised dates and the Integrity Commissioner Annual Report. Do I have a mover for those? Councillor Bryant and seconded by Councillor Cadeau. Any further discussion? All those in favor? And that's carried. There are no items pulled from the information package for further discussion. We now have Fire Chief Dennis Alos is with us this evening to provide council with an overview of his report.
Thank you, Chair. The report before you tonight is our 2023 to 2027 dispatch agreement with the City of Kitchener. This has been a long-standing agreement with them. It's been formalized since about at least 2010, as far as back as I can find. The City of Kitchener is our dispatching group, so they are responsible for toning us for all our fire medical calls within the township. And they have access to letting off our sirens in case of an emergency. So this has been, like I said, understand it's been a long-term relationship with them. We're kind of intertwined now with P25 radio system. So they pick all our dispatching for radio frequencies and stuff that we go to. So the recommendation that I was asking is for approval for the township of which to enter into this agreement with the City of Kitchener, provide pre-budget approval for the dispatching services cost for 2023. You did see them through the budget process, so you were aware of what the numbers would be, and that mayor and clerk be authorized to sign the dispatching agreement on behalf of the township of Woolwich. Do we have any questions? I'm glad to take any questions anybody has at this moment.
Any questions from council? All right, Councillor Cadeau.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Chief Aldis. I'm just wondering, has anything significant changed from the previous agreements to this one that's before us?
Through Chair to Councillor Cadeau, there hasn't been any major changes. A lot of it is language, and they caught up to technology. So this includes the next generation 911 system that's coming out. So it has that. It has their link from what they call their CAD. So all the computer system that they work that links back to incident reporting for us automatically. And a lot of it's just other technology change with GIS and stuff that they can incorporate for us. So it's they've just changed the language a bit to address the technology that's out there now and a little bit what's in the future in the next 5 years.
Thank you. And just one follow-up if I can. I'm looking at the projected costs, and is there a reason it goes from 70 down to like under 70 to 69.9 and then back up? I'm just wondering why it would have that dip for 2024.
Through Chair to Councillor Cadeau. What happened is a couple of years ago, we used to have two different dispatches setups in Waterloo region. The city in Cambridge had one and the city of Kitchener had one. So they consolidated the two of them to make one dispatching center. So once all the numbers and all the legalities for that comes into play, so it drops down a little bit because they're come on board then with their call volumes, and then it starts to go back up to accommodate everybody again. And those are just projected numbers based on the numbers that we've done for calls for them. So.
Any other questions from council? Yeah, Councillor Schwint.
Thanks, Clerk Smith. Just kind of following up on that. We have a deal with City of Kitchener. You're saying City of Cambridge is involved in it. Wondering how come this is a regional initiative or what the history is there.
Through Chair to Councillor Schwint. it is a regionalized for fire now. Like we consolidated our dispatch. It's linked through Waterloo Regional Police as well. All the townships, all the cities, all use the city of Kitchener. So we're one consolidated dispatch that way. So it is regionally that way. I mean, beyond them joining with regional police, but I don't know if that thought has even been brought out. So.
Well, that's helpful because the regional initiative now is just cities running it, not the region itself.
Yes.
Mayor Shantz?
I might suggest that the fire is all area municipal instead of regional, so that's probably why.
CEO Brenneman?
Yeah, thanks through you, Mr. Chair, to council. Also, again, just in time orientation because of the questions. This is good. My understanding too is we moved to one consolidated dispatch because it was one of many recommendations. Some of you may recall in the region when there was the mix-up regarding the helicopter crash at the airport. And there was a mix-up as to who should be responding, Woolwich and Cambridge. One of the recommendations coming out of that report was, hey, we need to do something to improve how dispatching happens. So something like that doesn't happen again, you know, and create some sort of significant issue in the future. In my time here, certainly, it used to be that there was separated and then they brought up together under a consolidated dispatch system.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you, Chief Eldos. There's a recommendation in the report. Is everyone clear on that report? What they're asking? Is there anyone who would like to move the recommendation? All right, that's moved by Councillor Grant and seconded by Councillor Cadeau. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor? That's unanimous, it's carried. Next item, we have Deputy Clerk Alex Smith to provide council with an overview of her report on procedural bylaw amendments. Go ahead, Deputy Clerk.
Good evening, Chair, Madam Mayor, and Council. Before you this evening is a report outlining minor procedural bylaw amendments. Back in December of 2022, Council approved the switch to Tuesday evening Council meetings to begin in February of 2023. As such, an update to the procedural bylaw is necessary to ensure agenda publication timelines are consistent and correct. Before I provide a summary of the proposed changes, I would like to note that in the first publishing of the agenda, the report wrongfully mentioned that meetings were moving to Mondays. That was a typo and it should have said Tuesdays. A revised version of the report wasn't included in the revised agenda published today. Staff are proposing 3 changes to publication timelines and submission deadlines with this bylaw amendment. Firstly, information packages will be distributed 2 Thursdays before a committee of the whole meeting. If a council member would like to discuss an item on that information package, notification must be sent to the clerk by noon on the following Wednesday. Secondly, committee of the whole and council agendas will be posted by 3 p.m. on the Thursday before the scheduled meeting. And thirdly, should the public wish to delegate at a meeting on a topic not scheduled for an upcoming agenda, they must register by 12 p.m. noon on the Wednesday before a scheduled meeting. Essentially, with our meetings moving ahead 1 day in the week from Mondays to Tuesdays, all of our current deadlines and timelines are proposed through this bylaw to move ahead 1 day with some slight timing changes. This will keep timeframes consistent for staff, council, and the public. And with that, if council has any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Council, do we have any questions for Ms. Smith? Councillor Schwint?
Yes, this is maybe procedural, but practical. We started allowing delegations to come in the meeting room, I guess, this month. Are we close to the next step of allowing media and the public in certain numbers to to attend in person, or what's the next milestone there?
Clerk Smith, would you like to elaborate?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I can speak to a few different things on this topic. In the last memo, I've kind of structured all my comments regarding COVID, the types of people that we can allow in the meeting room, technology, and then timing. So I'll go through each of those just briefly as I see it, allowing additional members of the public in chambers. So COVID, the last update that our senior management team received was that it is higher than last time. It is severe. And we've had a bit of a staffing issue after the latest holiday. We sort of pulled together and everyone chipped in, but a few staff members were sorely missed just after Christmas. In terms of people, we do allow hybrid for delegates. So delegates are allowed to come in person or over Zoom. And I think we could add that anyone from a member of the public could come in to watch council meetings again. That would be sort of a first since COVID started. But we would suggest that if we do that, we would give priority to anyone speaking. So our room capacity would be limited. We would try to keep the spacing to allow people who probably still feel comfortable having a little extra space. And then the priority would be for anyone who is a delegate, a speaker at a public meeting, or a presenter. So that would be my recommendation, and then continue to have registration required for people to attend either in person either in person or over Zoom. In person so we can monitor the numbers, and over Zoom so we can provide the necessary information for links. From a technology perspective, I would recommend no further changes. We were, as a reminder for council, I'd previously shown you that we can kind of pull that zoom out and show the whole room, but I think council wanted to stick with the individual cameras and screens. And then, of course, as I pointed out in my memo, we do have to provide an option for people who don't want to be on Zoom because there are members of the community who don't feel comfortable being on camera. And then as for timing, it really is up to council. I would just recommend to you that the first time, just to get staff ready to set these out, to educate the public, those kind of things. I would suggest March would be the first rotation that we do that. So there's a committee of the whole and council rotation in March. That would be my recommendation. But again, I'm at the will of council. So if council's feeling like they want to try to do it sooner, or if they're not feeling comfortable and want to wait a little bit longer, I'd be looking for direction from the members tonight.
Would council like to provide direction based on Clerk Smith's comments? Councilor Bryant?
Thank you. Through you to Clerk Smith. As you suggested, I think with staff being off sick, you need to keep monitoring the numbers and do what you have to keep everybody safe. So right now, if March looks good, then I'm fine with that. But if the numbers are not coming down, then I think you continue with what you're doing now. Just my thoughts.
Thank you. Councilor Grant?
I would second Councillor Bryant's suggestion. Just anecdotally, I've had 2 friends come down with COVID this past week. So I am comfortable with opening up by March, but I would also ask that we continue to monitor numbers and make that decision closer to the date.
Councilor Schwint?
I think March seems reasonable to me. Question I would have is, what's the capacity of this room would you be guessing right now, or recommending, I guess?
Through you, Chair Burgess, to Councillor Schwint. I haven't actually done the spacing yet, but I think that would be part of the exercise, to open the wall back there, to space out seats that would allow, the good kind of comfortable 6 feet between each seat. And then we would come up with a bit of a revised capacity for this room. And then what we can do is I can report back to you just before March, make sure the numbers are going in the right direction, if that's kind of how council's feeling more comfortable. And then we'll report on the number of people that we think the room can safely hold. And then again, as I said, what I would plan to do is to, have that number. If that's 20, 30 people, we would have a registration system, and then we would be able to say, if we're starting to get up to that number, we might have to hold it back just in case there are people planning on speaking if other people are just watching. I think I should also mention when I say that, Mr. Chair, is that we do continue to plan to allow for live Zoom and live stream. So any member of the public could continue to watch from home. I think it's more convenient for a lot of people. And then of course, we'd have the Zoom option. So if members of council are worried about weather or sick themselves, or even we've had some people Zoom in over a break or not being able to get back to council chambers on time, I think all that would continue. So this would just be opening up really more, allowing more members of the public in.
Any other questions, or is the rest of council good with the direction provided by Jeff for staff? All right, sounds good. Back to the original report, there is a recommendation in the report provided by Deputy Clerk. Is there anyone who would like to move that recommendation? Councillor Cadeau, and seconded by Mayor Shantz. Any further discussion? All those in favor? And that's passed, carried. Thank you. Next, we have the Manager of Planning, Jeremy Vink, with us to provide council with an overview of his report for a zone change application for Trinity United Church.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair, members of council. So this is for the Trinity United Church for the properties at 21 Arthur Street North and 4 Cross Street in Elmira. They're proposing an official plan amendment and a zone change application for the property. We heard the previous council heard the public meeting back last fall. We're now proceeding here with the recommendation report, which is before you. So essentially, the applicant is proposing to amend the township's official plan and zoning bylaw to facilitate the redevelopment of the property with a 5-story building, the ground floor of which would be for the church, and there would be an associated residential unit for the church on the main floor. And then the subsequent floors, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floors would be used for residential purposes. And the 5th floor would be an indoor-outdoor amenity space for the residents within the building. In total, they're proposing a maximum of 40 residential units of various 1- and 2-bedroom units with different sizes. Specifically, the official plan amendment that they requested was to permit an increased residential density from 120 units per hectare to 127 units. Just in terms of what that means, 120 units per hectare on this property would equal 38 units. 127 units gives you the 40. So we're talking a difference of 2 units for that change in units per hectare. The zone change application is to amend the zoning for 4 Cross Street from a residential R5 to the C1, and amend the site-specific zoning regulations for the entire site to permit the place of worship on the main floor, which generally isn't permitted in commercial areas, although we have recognized all the other churches across the region, across the township in Elmira and St. Jacobs. So we'd be keeping that zoning in place. To increase the maximum permitted building height from 10.5 meters to 18.1 meters to get that height for the number of units and buildings, and to reduce the required parking space was originally proposed at the time. And I'll get into that a little bit further to explain something along those lines around parking. Staff have reviewed the applications in regard to the provincial policy as well as the regional official plan, and have comments from the region all supporting, and we agree that the application meets those policies and that policy framework. With regards to the township's official plan, the lands are in the core area and they're designated an urban growth center. This is an area where we'd like to see intensification take place to support businesses in the downtown and to see residential units in proximity also to various things like the transit system that we do have in place. And although the building is proposed to be 5 stories tall, it will not result in the need for any height increase just because of the number of units. They could have spread the units out differently, so the height's not tied to the number of units, just to be clear. The location, definitely, like I mentioned, will be in the core. We'll help support businesses in the downtown by bringing people nearby so people could walk easily to the stores and bring greater density that way. It will be on full municipal services and utilizing existing municipal services that are there, which is a great resource and reuse. The development will also need obviously will have to meet our staging and servicing guidelines, and staff have reviewed that there is plenty of allocation available for the staging of this development to take place, and staff is supportive that their density and servicing can be granted to them, which is part of the recommendation that they be granted the servicing capacity for this to take place. And that's consistent with our official plan policies. Also, it is one of our official plan policies that in a core area, we try to encourage the main floor to be commercial or a use that is interacting with the downtown, with the people walking by. In this case, it's going to be the church use, and that has been in the past. So staff has no concerns with continuing with that and allowing that to take place. It is noted that part of the parking solution is to have parking on the street level, and part of that frontage will have some parking, and staff are going to be through site plan trying to mitigate to minimize the influence of parking to the pedestrian walking past to make it a little more attractive in terms of street frontage. The applicant completed a noise study mainly to address road traffic noise to the unit. So there's some items there that will have to be addressed at building construction and part of site plan, which can be easily implemented at that time, but doesn't prohibit the development from taking place that would negatively impact the residents in the future apartment. A shadow study was also completed, and the applicants reviewed that. Currently, we don't really have any policies in our plan about shadows. However, we were able to work with the applicant to review our shadows, the shadows that were proposed relative to other neighboring municipalities like Waterloo and Guelph, to make sure they met those stringent guidelines and were consistent with those, and staff is satisfied that the shadows will not overly encumber an adjacent property, so the site can develop appropriately. The C1 zone doesn't require amenity areas, but in this case, the applicant is proposing that rooftop area, which is a great opportunity, and will provide some amenity space for each of those units. Staff will work with the applicants as they go through site plan to try to address some green building and sustainability elements where possible. And they did some geotechnical work also to make sure that the grounds and everything is suitable to take this development to go in place. The phase 1 and phase 2 reports are also completed. So as such, staff is satisfied that the official plan amendment is appropriate to go from 120 to 127 units per hectare. With regards to the zoning, the applicant is proposing to amend the zoning to allow the place of worship to be on the main floor. They already have the zoning in place for that, but they wish to continue with that, obviously, for this use. They also, as I noted, wish to increase the height from 10.5 to 18.1 meters to allow for the building in that location where they're proposing it. And as I noted previously, they were proposing to amend the parking to reduce the number of parking spaces. However, through the review, we discovered they don't need a parking amendment to reduce the number of parking. So there's within the C1 zone, the township allows a 50% reduction. So using that calculation, they actually have sufficient parking for the church as well as the residential uses on site to accommodate one for each of the spaces and some additional space for some visitors, et cetera, and the church use. So parking reduction is not required. However, when playing with their site plan, they have realized that it'd be a little more functional if they could reduce the size of the parking spaces to go from 2.75 by 6 meters, which is the standard space, to 2.75 by 5.5 meters in terms of a size of a parking space. That's something new that they added near the end of the process. Staff have reviewed it. It is consistent with what we're potentially proposing to council later this year in our new zoning bylaw, and consistent with some of the cities around us that use that size. So staff has no concerns with this proposed reduction, and that there's no additional need for another public meeting in that regard to that change. One last item, the region of Waterloo in their comments did note that they do require a holding zone provision to be put in place till the record of site is finalized. And they also do not permit the use of geothermal, and want to make that very clear, and want that part of the zoning bylaw to make it clear that there's no geothermal uses permitted. There was a few public comments, nothing overly significant. One at the very early on in the process was about the number of bedroom unit types. And then another comment that was received literally as staff has finished the report and put it onto council's agenda, just concerned about the parking reduction, which, as staff noted, is no longer an issue. So before you have staff's recommendation to proceed with the official plan and zoning amendments. As noted, the recommendation includes the official plan to be approved and sent to the region for final approval, the zoning bylaw, amendments, including the holding vote provisions, to be put in place subject to the region approving the official plan, council approving the allocation of sewage capacity to the development, and that council be satisfied no further public meeting is required, specifically in terms of the proposed change to the size of parking spaces. And that in this case, that the council authorize the director of development services to be delegated to release the holding provisions related to the requirement from the region there that the record of site be completed. That could be delegated down to staff and not require any more council's time. So if there's any questions, staff can answer them. And I think the applicants are all waiting, anticipating, and hoping to see this get approved tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Vink. Before council asks any questions, I would like to let council know that the consultants and applicant are in the meeting, as well as a representative from Trinity United Church. Should council have any questions for them? Councilors, are there any questions for Mr. Vink, the consultants, applicant, or church representative? Councilor Grant, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, through you to the staff. I was just wondering if we can get some insight onto why geothermal is not allowed on this site.
It's not just this site, through your chair to the Councillor Grant. It's not just site. We have had it in other cases where the region has given us that same comment. Most of it deals with the hydrogeological concerns in the area. And the region is hesitant to allow geothermal because it usually means poking into the ground and then creating an area where groundwater contamination could potentially happen as you're poking these things down into the ground, especially deep ones in these areas. So it seems to be related to hydrogeological concerns, and that's why they don't want to see them, just to protect groundwater.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bryant.
Thank you. Through you to staff. I have a question regarding the parking. We have basically allotted, I'm guessing, one parking space per unit. Is that correct?
Through the chair to Councillor Bryant, essentially, yes, it's one space per unit. It's the minimum required by the zoning bylaw. And they'll have I can't remember the exact number for the church itself. I think there's about a number of units, spaces allocated to them. So there's parking for that, which is generally during the weekend. And there are, in this case, they happen to have a few extra spaces for visitors.
Follow up if I could, please. So in this particular day and age, most people, if there's couples living in apartments, they have more than one vehicle. What happens if we have a large influx of people with two vehicles? Are we going to be faced with a lot of on-street parking, or what do we do with the extra cars if we run into this situation?
Through the chair to Councillor Bryant, it is a possibility. We haven't seen that substantially. We have a few times in the core seen some people wanting a second vehicle. The hope here is, and that which we've seen in many downtown areas, is that people have access to transit, and then because they also are downtown, they don't maybe have to drive as much. So hopefully they're walking to facility locations too. So it is reducing their need. There's a bunch of one-bedroom units in this case, so hopefully they will not be needing two spaces. If they need more spaces, they would need to find alternative arrangements, and they would have to find that themselves. The site would have to, make it very clear they get one space per unit. And just like anyone renting somewhere, they have to determine if they want to rent a unit if they don't have enough parking, or find somewhere else on a neighboring parcel to try work with a neighboring landowner to find an additional space.
Thank you.
Councillor Cadeau.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Mr. Vink, I'm wondering, with the recent changes, is it really impacting your report in that, 40 dwellings, we now have 83 spaces still, or is it still the 57? I'm trying to get some clarity around the total number of spaces that will be permitted on this site after these recent changes that have been made.
The chair to Councillor Cadeau, yes, it will stay at 57 spaces, and that will exceed the minimum required under the zoning bylaw.
So as a follow-up, I'm wondering, and I'm not sure that Mr. Vink would be the appropriate question for this, but if there's 40 parking spaces for individuals who would be living there, that really only leaves potentially, if I'm doing my math right, 17 for individuals who would be showing up for Sunday. And they would have to utilize on-street parking. They would have to utilize other amenities throughout the downtown core. Am I understanding that correct?
Yeah, through the chair to council. Yes, so there is, so the church requires by calculation, according to zoning bylaw, 12 space, they need a minimum of 12 spaces and they'll be providing those. That means 5 leftover spaces on the site. So that could be assigned to visitors to the church on Sundays or visitors during the week to residents or something like that. So that would be up to the landowner to determine how they allocate those 5 units. Definitely, especially churches obviously are more Sunday oriented, some other special events here and there. Given that there's usually less demand on Sundays, just because stores aren't as open, they're going to be using some on-street parking, which they probably already do right now in that area too. So they would be relying on on-street parking for those time periods if they need some additional overflow.
Just as a follow-up as well. So the reduction in the size of the parking spaces, that's going to have no impact to the number of spaces. It's probably just impacting the way in which you're positioning them. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely through the chair to Councilor Cadeau. It is definitely more of a internal traffic movement. It gives a bit of more room for moving the garbage truck through, etc., to make it work more efficiently, but it doesn't reduce or change the number of parking spaces they could provide. It just gives a better flow internally for truck turning movements for garbage trucks, etc.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Shantz.
Thank you. My question, I've got 2 of them. One's related to parking as well. Can you tell me how many spaces does the church currently have, and are they fully used on a Sunday morning?
Through the chair to the Mayor Shantz, they have, I think, about 18 on site right now. I could stand to be corrected on that. Are they all used on Sundays? I do not know. I don't have that kind of information. The church might be able to better answer that if they are available to have that information, but I don't know for sure.
Okay, so there's 18. I think you had 12 allocated to the church plus 5 sort of freebies on the lot. Is that correct? So that's not all that different, I guess, than what's there now. I know this project has been a long time coming, and I'm sure the church is very excited about it, and so am I. But I do have a question about the height and how you came to 5 stories. Can you, and I think it may be in the report, but could you just speak to that again? Because that's from 10 meters, 10.5 meters to 18 is almost double the height. So that's going to be quite a change for the town.
Through the chair to Mayor Shantz. So yes, generally the 10.5 gives you a 3-story structure. And then when you're talking downtowns and some of these taller structures, generally the first floor will have a little bit more height to them, just for allow for commercial flexibility, things like that. So they're a little taller than usually some of your other stories for residential, etc. So the first floor is obviously, as I mentioned, is for the church. So there's a little bit of height there for that to take place. And the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floors are the residential. Okay. So, but then the 5th floor is a rooftop. There is a sort of a indoor space up there. So the height does include that 5th floor. There's only a small portion that is an indoor space, and a lot of it is an outdoor amenity space. So we do have to count that height, and height in this case, because it's a flat roof building, basically is the height of the very top of the structure at this point. So that's how they calculated height, and it's based off of how far it is off the ground to the top. So in terms of comparisons, the township next to the township office, just a few doors down, there is a 4-story structure, for example, apartment building. So we're starting to see a few more taller structures. We will have a 6-story structure potentially in one of our new subdivisions with an apartment building in it. So for example, in Elmira. So we will start to see taller structures, not just in the core, but in some other areas, just to accommodate some gentle height increase. The core area report, the downtown study that you recall from last year done about the urban design and how to grow the downtown and what it would look like, it did actually lean towards going all the way up towards 8 stories. So this is still below that, for example.
Thank you, Chair Burgess. Just one more question, and I hope I know the answer to this, but I'm assuming that our fire equipment is capable of servicing that kind of height. And yeah,
Yeah. Through the chair to the mayor, yes. All site as zone change applications and site plans are circulated to our fire chief for comment to ensure that everything is addressed to their satisfaction. And the fire department has raised no concerns in this case about the building height. So they are able to look after things from their perspective.
I would just say congratulations to Trinity United for your persistence and for continuing on with the project.
Councillor Cadeau.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Mr. Vink. This isn't as related to this project in particular, but if you're suggesting that we're going to see more and more of these applications, currently is our bylaw at the 10.5 meters? Is that kind of where it rests? And if that's the case, I'm wondering if that should be reconsidered, if we should look at maybe, increasing, what we're allowing to be built in the township. And then perhaps while we're at it, we can add, some shadow regulations into some of that as well, because I think that as we see more of these, we will hear some complaints from, or maybe not complaints, but concerns from residents about the casting of shadows that some of these structures may result in. So I suppose more a comment than anything, but if you want to speak to that a little bit.
Through the chair, yeah, to Councillor Cadeau, actually great questions and comments, I guess. Just in regards to building height, the first question, staff is reviewing the township zoning bylaw, which will come to council later this year, probably mid this year. One of the things on the list is to look at the height for downtown Elmira for the C1 zone and look at what the proposed height should be going away from the 10.5 and going up. And then what we're also doing as part of that is we realize the shadow issues did come into play. And as you also are probably aware, staff is starting with a consultant to start the township's official plan review. And one of the things on their list for them to review is to give us shadow policies already. So we're definitely working on those issues and looking to move forward with some of those and see how we can address those heights and shadow issues in the future.
Mayor Shantz.
Thank you. Just one other question that came to mind is about the building elevation. I think we had some people express concerns about the building elevation and how it fit into the area. Can you speak to the process on that, or if that was just sort of a stand-in for the rest of the work, or where that is at?
Through the chair to the mayor. So in terms of facade treatments, the government under Bill 23 or 109, I think it was 23, took away our abilities to control facade in terms of what it looks like the whether it's brick or stone, or whether it's how we treat the facade. We are only allowed to, from a facade perspective, deal with mass, like how it sits situated to the street, and the front entry and how that is dealt with to the street, essentially. So we did lose controls under the province's changes around what we can control in terms of how a building looks from the exterior. But just generally speaking, from a facade perspective, we will work with the applicants through site plan and see what we can do to make sure it does try to fit in as best as possible. But like I said, we won't be actually legally able to control it, what it exactly looks like for those types of things.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully, excuse me, hopefully we can cooperate together and make something that keeps the residents happy as well.
Any other questions? Seeing none, there is a recommendation in the report. Is there anyone who would like to move the recommendation? Mayor Shantz, and seconded by Councillor Grant. Any further discussion? All those in favor? And that's passed and carried by everyone. And we will get Councillor Schwint back in here. All right. Next, we have Mr. Vink again to provide council an overview of his report for agricultural enforcement. Go ahead, Mr. Vink.
Thank you once again, council. Seeing a lot of me tonight. So this is the agricultural enforcement, and I'm going to give you a bit of history here because it does date back a little bit. So starting in about 2020, council directed staff to move forward with some agricultural enforcement, basically going property by property across the township to bring agricultural properties into conformity with the zoning bylaw, because we had some issues of illegal uses taking place. And we were trying to figure out how to legalize and get things cleaned up. So that was part of the process. So we were kind of directed to go through and start working through the township. In 2022, last year, staff provided a bit of an update to council, in part to just give council a heads up of where things were, as how things were proceeding, and also to kind of get a bit of a direction if council wished us to proceed, given that we were getting some feedback from the community because nobody likes enforcement and people were just having some questions and comments. So we wanted to get council's perspective of how to proceed. So back last August, we brought a report to council, which is attached, just outlining how things were going, how things were proceeding, and why we were doing this, and whether we should, what the options were to move forward. So one of the, like, for example, we were getting some questions just because people were concerned that they had to be brought into compliance. People were concerned that they're being, picked, first versus other people who would have to wait, like we wouldn't get to them for a longer time, that kind of thing. Staff is basically started at the top end of the township and are working our way down. It is a slow process. We do about 50 properties at a time. Right now, we've done about a third of the township, maybe, not even quite. And it's probably going to take us another few years to get through the rest of the township easy. We're estimating 5 to 6, basically, just because it takes so much time to actually deal with the property owners to figure out how to get them into compliance. And we're trying to work with them as best we can to do it within a reasonable amount of time, but just also make sure we can get them to where they need to be. So that does, as I noted, does take time. So staff presided in the previous report on August, just the pros and cons of options. One of the options was to continue with the process as we were doing it and just slow and steady continue on, which is perfectly legal and fair. We had legal opinion on that. The other choice was to obviously cease operations and just kind of go back to the age-old standard of just complaint basis. There was some concerns on issues with that, obviously, because we've already targeted half of the community or a third of the community, and these other people would be kind of getting off in some respects by not getting caught and addressing these issues. And there's a lot of issues to be addressed. And I'll get into some of the concerns of why we wanted to keep going. One of the other choices was to retain a consultant to do the work for us and to speed it up, to try to do it within 1 year and get everything done at once. And the other last option was basically to hire some additional staff and then to get the work done. So council last year looked at those options. They obviously, as I noted, asked us to kind of proceed on, and that's leading to tonight's report. But one of the reasons they want us to proceed on is part of this is tied to legal issues, because there's a number of concerns with some of these structures out there. They were converting farm buildings into industrial commercial uses. And when they did that, they weren't following building code. So we have a number of structures and businesses out there that are not meeting code. So there's a liability concern, and a liability concern that we know of. So as a result, we are potentially on the hook, so to speak, if something does happen on some of these structures. They lead to potential then of concerns of structural issues if they're not built properly, safety concerns, etc. So the legal opinion was we should be continuing to move forward and address this because of the liability concerns and getting them brought up to building code. So it's more code issues in the end, but it's tied to the planning side. So legal and safety concerns were just top priority. Part of this too is some of these properties, obviously from a financial perspective, if they converted the buildings illegally, they were not potentially being taxed from a municipal tax perspective as commercial industrial. And some of them were obviously then not, they were obviously not paying the development charges as required. So they were not paying for the same fees that, and somebody in the industrial area in Elmira or St. Jacobs or Breslau would have to pay. So they're kind of getting away from things. And there was some concerns from some people in the community have said it in the past that they thought it was unfair. So council last year reviewed all this, determined that staff should proceed with enforcement. Their direction was to continue but they want us to work on the costing to kind of work through the consultant, what that cost would be, and do a cost recovery or review. So in front of you tonight is that kind of understanding of a cost recovery. We put that out to an RFP to try to understand what the cost would be to get this done in 1 year. We received one submission to the RFP, which is in front of you tonight, is Stantec Consulting, and would cost just over $100,000. So for us we think to achieve cost recovery would be to charge these properties that do get caught after, based on us reviewing, an extra fee on top of what would be the normal fee if they came in willingly on their own. So let's say in this case, a site plan application for a non-farm diversified use is $2,500. If we find them and we have to deal with them and it's through an enforcement process, we charge them an extra $2,000 because the costs incurred to go through all this for staff time, working with them, et cetera, is a lot more work. So we figured that was that way, based on our estimates of what might happen, is how we would achieve cost recovery if we were to hire a consulting firm to go forward or hire someone else to do the work, like staff. That's some additional staff. So that would be roughly the cost we'd be seeing is about $2,000 on a zone change, site plan, and about $150 on a certificate of occupancy above the standard fee. So before you have tonight is a recommendation to move forward then with that, is to hire Stantec Consulting to do the enforcement works, to improve the fees and charges bylaw amendment, to add those additional fees for any property that is caught through the enforcement process, and then to modify the 2023 budget accordingly to add in the costs for the Stantec Consulting work to be completed in the planning budget, but also add in the additional revenues to try and to balance that budget back out. So any questions?
Council, are there any questions for Mr. Vink? Councillor Cadeau?
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Mr. Vink. What would the timeline be if this were to be approved for that consultant work? Would it, take another year to kind of unfold, or is it going to happen, relatively quickly after this decision is granted? Because I see here, 21 weeks approximately?
Yes, definitely through the chair to Councillor Cadeau. They're estimating at least a year, basically a year to go through it. So they'll be wrapping up probably early 2024.
Any other questions from council? Councillor Schwinn?
Yes, I'm just wondering how much extra time has staff spent, say, in the last 12 months on this, I'm gonna call it a program, for lack of a better word.
Through the chair to Councillor Schwinn, a good question. We haven't tracked the time that we've spent. It's been kind of, driving around is probably a few hours, like on an afternoon to go out and do the drive-bys, another hour, a few hours on the computer to verify through air photo imagery, kind of some of the stuff we're seeing. So, and then we send out letters that takes another few hours. So you're probably, before the first letter goes out, you probably spent about 5 hours to get things out. And after that, it depends on each property. So each one is so different. It's hard to, you can't compare one to the other. Some people are willing to work with you and you get it wrapped up fairly quickly. Other people they have to kind of go back and forth about what their choices are and solutions. So it takes a little bit longer and is a lot more work. So you spend a lot of hours actually on that next step of trying to legalize them in some cases. And you can spend 20 hours just working with an applicant to try get them to the end process if they're willing to work with you to legalize it, and then, just get them through the site plan. And like I mentioned, the cost for a site plan is $2,500. In the end of the day, our costs are fairly minimal compared to, unfortunately, the development charges, building code costs that they have to pay, because the building permit fees are generally high for the development charges that they have to kind of pay in the end.
Okay, I guess that brought up another question on development charges. If it's non-farm business not requiring any services, I guess I'm wondering the rationale and development charges at the same rate as, say, a plant in Breslau that needs water, sewer, gas, an extra road, that type of thing. Is there a difference in calculations?
Through the chair to Councillor Schwint, yes, there is a difference between the two. There is a different rate for serviced lands to unserviced lands. So obviously both use roads and impact roads, and there's other fees, and they both utilize other components. So the development charges study does identify a difference between the two. Serviced lands are treated differently and generally higher in taxes because they have higher needs just for that, things like servicing.
Councillor Bryant.
Thank you. Through you to, I'm going to say probably Mr. Petherick for this one. How much additional tax dollars do you anticipate we would bring in by bringing everybody up to conformity? Put you on the spot, but.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do not have an answer for that because I don't think that I've actually thought or had my head wrapped around exactly what is out there from a non-conformist to be able to pick up the, I guess, the development or the buildings that should be picked up from an assessment. So I do not have that answer or a good handle on that.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? All right, seeing none. There is a recommendation in the report. Would anyone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Cadeau, would anyone like to second it? Councillor Bryant? Any further discussion? Councillor Schwint?
I'm really struggling with this one. We just went through 2 or 3 weeks of budgeting and heard from planning department, all these changes that are coming down the pipeline, more work required and needs in the department. Is this the township's right priority for 2023? Would we be more efficient in dealing with some of our other planning priorities and go back to the complaint-based system for a year until we can sort some of that out and get a more stable footing?
Councillor Cadeau?
Thank you, Chair. Through you to council. I think that, you know, this operating on what could be full recovery allows us to address this at the same time as addressing a lot of those other priorities. So moving it back to a complaint-based system, you know, as Mr. Vink had suggested, it puts a lot of people that have already gone through this process at a huge disadvantage. So this opportunity that presents itself for us to have this review completed within a year is appealing, and it can put everybody on a level playing field. And who knows how much it could bring in for the township. Maybe, you know, we're out of pocket at the end of the day, you know, having to pay this consultant and not recovering some of those funds. Hopefully that's the case, right? I suppose if I could offer maybe one more question through you, Chair, to Mr. Vink. Is there a mechanism in place, and I think that you had alluded to it, for a property owner to come forward and try to get this resolved without having to pay that additional $2,000?
The chair to Councilor Cadeau, definitely. Anybody could come in today. I had one a few weeks ago come in to propose his use on his property and go through the process and just go through that process with us. They still pay the site plan fee and work through it with us, but they come in voluntarily and we work with them to get that completed and bring them into legal conformity. So it can happen at any point in time that people come in. They've, you know, I think a number of the community has been aware. Sorry, I accidentally hit mute. So definitely it would, you know, they could have that opportunity and avoid the extra cost. That's always there. And I think a number of the community know it does exist, and that's an opportunity. It may be an incentive for them to come in because they now know it's cheaper than going through us dealing with them through an enforcement side. So that is an opportunity to even do a bit of a media blitz to get people to come in before the costs go higher, for example.
Councillor Grant.
Through you, Chair, to the rest of the council, I would concur with Councillor Trudeau that I think this, if it's going to be something that we break even on, it makes sense to do it now. I will admit that I have concerns about commercial buildings not being up to code. I think that's a public safety issue, not just for the owners of those properties, but for any visitors to that commercial business. So I would support it.
Councillor Bryant.
I also agree with Councillor Cadeau. Excuse me. I think there's a lot of people that have already started paying these fees, and if we stop the program now, it's not fair to them. I think we need to continue. We will probably recover our costs, even though we have to hire the consultant. So I think we need to move forward and get this finished.
Mayor Shantz.
Thank you. And just further to what's been said, when we considered this in the last term of council, we were looking at the safety issues that were mentioned, and also to make it equitable for everyone across the township. And in that line, it is important to sort of carry on and get it all done in a timely fashion. If you've got people with that are non-compliant in one part of the township and compliant in another part of the township, it's not equitable. So I think it's important that we move forward with this and just get it done, and then try to keep from getting behind again.
Councillor Schwinn.
I understand the equality thing, and I'm struggling a little bit with liability. Has the township ever been held liable for anything like this in the past? And I guess is there some background on that? And I guess my second concern is, this is step one of a process we go through agricultural properties or rural properties. Is the next step we're going to start going up and down the roads in Elmira and Breslau looking for decks or accessory buildings that have been improperly located or built or that type of thing, which may not be quite up to code. Is that equality in our township? Where is that line that we're going to, I guess, police everything? I'm worried we're going a little bit too far with this initiative, but I understand where some other councillors are coming from.
Would staff like to comment on the first question, maybe the second, if we have had run into liability stuff?
Through the chair, I'm not aware myself whether we have run into any liability questions or concerns that I know of. I know some of the properties we've had to deal with have had to issue building code orders on them because they're unsafe issues with paint booths, things like that. They're just unsafe structures, so there is concerns. So it's not that we think there might be concerns, maybe we know there's concerns with some of these structures, that the way they're operating, but I couldn't tell you, not that I'm aware of that we've ever had any liability concerns put on us, that we've been sued for anything in the past, but doesn't take long if something does happen.
All right, seeing no more questions, I guess we'll vote on this. All those in favor? And all those opposed? All right, that motion is carried. Lastly, we have Director of Financial Services, Treasurer Richard Petherick, to provide council with an overview of his report for water and wastewater budgets. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So over the past couple of weeks, we've been sitting in these council chambers going over the tax supported budgets. And so as part of the budget process, we have two additional budgets, both the water and the wastewater budgets, which are considered to be the rate supported budgets. So looking first at the water budget, staff has been proposing that the per cubic meter charge increase from $1.82 to $1.89. And that would represent a 3.7% increase to the budget, or to the rate, I should say. So looking at that, there's two main drivers from that. One is the regional charges. So we receive the water that we provide to residents that is supplied by the region. And so that actually accounts for about 70% of our net operating budget. So you can tell that has a pretty huge impact. And their charges are going up 2.9%, or at least proposed to go up 2.9% in 2023. The second is with regards to some external services support that or infrastructure services, excuse me, are looking at including and getting done in this year, and they're going out for a tender multi-year contract. Hopefully, is what they're looking to do to provide some additional support services in the areas of the water main repairs, water service replacement, as well as the hydrant services area. So when you're looking at the impact of what this increase would look like, it would be approximately $14.28 per year, or $2.38 per bi-monthly billing. And this is based on 204 annual cubic meters or 17 cubic meters per month for the residential property. From the wastewater side, staff are proposing a 6.06% increase. This represents the rate going from $3 to $3.18 per cubic meter. Again, two main drivers in this. One, just as a region provides the potable water to us, they also are the ones that take away the wastewater. So their charge is increasing, or proposed to increase, 4.9% in 2023. The other pressure that we're seeing in the wastewater budget in 2023 is the repayment for the industrial drive. Through the reconstruction project in 2022, there was a component of that funding source that was being debt financed, and that was because we did not have enough sewer capacity in our reserve funds. So therefore, we are looking at borrowing. And what is included in this draft 2023 wastewater budget is a half year, because we'd be looking at going out with the region from a debt request in the springtime, which would mean that we would be starting the repayment in the fall of 2023. So therefore, it'd be the half year. So again, looking at that, the impact on the same residential unit of 204 annual cubic meters, or 17 cubic meters per month, would represent $36.72 per year, or $6.12 per bi-monthly billing. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would be happy to take any questions that council may have, but I also remind council that Director Poupé and our operations manager, Carter McGuire, is also on the line as well.
Council, are there any questions for staff? All right, seeing none. Oh, Councillor Schwinn.
Sorry, I'm slow on this one. Since we ran out of funds in the reserve in 2022, are we confident we're building enough reserves going forward for the next project and the project after that?
Mr. Panther.
So through Mr. Chairman, what we do have in our 2023 draft capital budget is a rate review study. The reserve charges, or the service charges we charge to our residents, that number has not changed since 2005. And I think it's because councils in the past have seen that, like, ours is definitely the highest within the region. There are a lot of municipalities are catching up to us, which I think they've been very hesitant on increasing that. So that is the concern that we still have. And that's why we want to go through this rate review study to be able to determine what that true service charge should be. But we know it should be higher, because that's our concern. And we're starting to see that with some of the dementia requirements that we do have.
Any follow up on that? You're good.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear we're doing the review. I'm just wondering, are we going to be a year behind then on implementing the increase, or do we have to start sooner rather than later? Which is a terrible conversation after 2 weeks of budgets. I know.
Right.
Through you, Mr. Sherman, I don't disagree that the increase would be necessary. I think it's just, for us, we're looking at it from the prudency perspective, to have that study to fully vet out exactly what it is that rate should be going, and then actually have a plan of how to get to where a rate should be. It's probably best. I would say from a staff level, I don't disagree with your comment. I'm just, I guess I would say I'm at council's will if they want to take a look at that.
Councillor Grant.
Through you, Chair, to the rest of council, I would agree with Mr. Petherick, but just under the, like, I don't disagree with Councillor Schwitt that maybe it needs to be higher, but I wouldn't be comfortable without a market study of some sort to actually make that judgment call. I don't know what would be a fair amount for us to pick, so I would much prefer to see kind of a study to have the hard data first before we make that choice.
Councillor Cadeau.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Mr. Petherick. I'm looking at this budget and I'm hearing your comments about us being the highest rate around. I'm wondering if you could provide a little bit of context as to why that is.
So, Mr. Chairman, I am talking about the service charge perspective, so not the cubic meter charge. I think for us, back in 2005, the rate review study, so that was the last time a full one was done. What the consultant was looking at the perspective of, what do we currently have, and then how do we replace that? And also looking a little bit forward thinking as well as to say, okay, we have growth that's coming on. Once you add that in, you still need to start collecting to start to repay that. I would say the couple of comments that I have, at least from our side, is we've done a very good job of keeping up with our infrastructure. So I think for us, we've been able to maintain that. I would argue probably better than some. I wouldn't say most, but I would say definitely some. We've been doing that. I think the other challenge, and especially from the city perspective, because you look at their service charge, it is a lot lower. My argument to that, or my observation on that, is probably more along the lines of there's only so many contractors that can only do so much work, and they have a lot more people to spread that charge around. So based on the two things, from my perspective, is we do a very good job of keeping up with their infrastructure. Obviously, I think to Councillor Swin's perspective, we are kind of lagging a little bit behind just because we haven't actually increased that for quite a number of years. But also for the fact that, I think others, and especially the larger centers, are able to kind of spread some of those costs around.
Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the rest of council, I'm just wondering if there is value in us, similar to what we did with the market study for staff, if there's something in policy place for us to do a review of this more often than the 12, 20, 22, my math is right.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, last time we did one was in 2005. So it was quite a number of years ago. And I think good practice is for municipalities to do that at least every 5 years. And you're right. I think when we go through the process, I think as part of those recommendations, we should be coming back to have a policy that it's done on that 5-year cycle. Or maybe a consultant may actually tell us it should be more, should be less. But I think you're definitely right. I think we need to be sort of coming back with some studies. And at the very least, council can make an informed decision if they want to actually keep the rates the same, or knowing what that rate should look like is probably really good, useful information.
Councillor Schwinn.
I guess I'm struggling with the need for a consultant to do this study. I'm assuming staff have built in the capital budgets, kind of their plans on water mains and water pipe repairs over the next 2, 3, 4 years, coincides with a lot of road development, I assume. So wouldn't most of that be available in-house? That would be a good estimate, at least on the 3-year timeline.
Yeah, through Mr. Chairman, this study would be looking a lot further than that. You'd be looking over the life cycle of the whole entire infrastructure. So 40, 50 years out, and you're looking at not just like the water mains, but the laterals, the other infrastructure that supports the water, the hydrants, the water valves, all of that is going to be looked at when you go through the rate review study. So I think you can take a look at it from the perspective that we may, be able to come up with what we need from that short term. But I really think we need that long term to be able to get ourselves to where we're in a good position to be fully funded from a capital perspective.
Councillor Grant.
Sorry. Through you, Chair, maybe this is an appropriate question for David Brennerman or Jeff Smith. I'm just wondering if there's some direction on how we would go about putting forth a recommendation for maybe staff to do that early preliminary work of looking at how often we should be reviewing these rate reviews, and then maybe we can come forward with a motion.
Yeah, Brennan.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Grant and Council regarding her question. Yeah, I mean, motions are always good. However, we can also take it as direction, I think, on something like this, as long as there's consensus, as long as there's a will, because staff will have to go and do some work. But I wanted to take the floor as well because a couple of observations. I want to use this opportunity to say to council, being here the length of time I have, and Richard as well. I think we can also comment that when we reflect even on the last 15 or 16 years, one thing that we've always been responsible of too in preparing these water and wastewater budgets is, I think Richard would agree, sometimes area municipalities will just pass on whatever the regional charge is. Now, I understand that this is a different year, but what I'm trying to say is, if you looked over the last 15, 16 years, what you would see is we didn't just always do that. Sometimes, what we were charging, was ultimately less than what the region was passing along. So I'm not talking about the service charge, I'm talking about the cubic meter charge. So, that's something to consider. And I guess before Richard may want to reemphasize this, is with respect to using consultants, because it's throughout my career it's been a common question, well, can't we do this in-house? There's a lot of things that we could do in-house if we were willing to wait a couple of years to get it done, because these types of studies would have to be done off the side of the desks. Whereas I've always tried to say to councils, no different than what you just talked about related to agricultural enforcement. It's like having a contract staff person in here for a defined period of time. They're in and they're out and they get the work done, right? And that's helpful because, as you would have seen from the business plan, staff have a whole bunch of other priorities that they need to execute and work on as well. And the other thing that we don't have that the cities have is, an abundance of financial analysts. A lot of larger cities have financial analysts, a number of financial analysts, where they could assign to a project like this. We don't have the need for that. And again, that's where I would submit to council, a concentrated consultant makes sense, because we're not saying to hire a financial analyst, to do this, that, and the other thing. We're saying, come in, do the study, do the 40, 50 year analysis, and then it's done. And then council and staff have something to guide us on that. So I just wanted to make those points in favor of, why in this particular case, I feel it makes sense.
Does council have any other questions or want to provide direction on any of that? Councilor Grant.
Thank you. Through you to the rest of council. I would, I'm because I'm new at this, I'm not sure if a motion would be appropriate or just a direction to staff. I think it'd be beneficial for us to have some sort of policy in place that has that rate review done every 4 to 5 years, whatever is the recommended amount. Even if we don't decide to go with the recommended rate change, I think that knowledge is power, and that will allow us to make those decisions and come at it when we do these budget deliberations at a position of knowledge.
Do you want to clarify 4 or 5 years? Or ask staff?
I guess I know Mr. Petherick said that as a consultant may recommend like a smaller window. So I guess I would want to leave that open for what would be the best measure. I think you said 5 years, every 5 years. So I'd be comfortable with that. It's just I wasn't sure if a consultant would come back and say something like we need to do it every 3 years. That would be more appropriate.
Councilor Schwinn?
Are you suggesting every 5 years? sorry about that. Will staff just go ahead and do this every 5 years, or will this be something that comes before council ahead of time before that consultant's engaged? So council has the chance to tweak the terms of reference and understand that we're doing the appropriate study.
Mr. Bethrick?
Through Mr. Chairman, I think the best opportunity for council would be through the budget process, because we would have to identify the cost for that study, and from that perspective, before we would engage anybody to do that. So I think that's the good opportunity for us to come back through that process and make sure that council is still okay with us going ahead with that project.
So, Councillor Bryant?
Through you, I was just going to suggest maybe we just go with direction instead of a motion and get it looked at for future use and decide at that point in time where to go with it. I think there's no point putting the horse before the cart, basically, or whatever that expression is, but might as well get it right. I think I got that backwards, but anyway.
No, I think that was right. I'd be happy with a direction that, like I said, I'm not too choosy on which. I just kind of want to see that report come through.
So,
I think you've got consensus.
all right, everyone's in favor? Sounds good. All right,
Thanks.
thank you. And there's recommendation in that report for the existing stuff you talked about before, all the questions and debate there. Is there anyone who would like to move that recommendation? Councillor Cadeau, and seconded by Councillor Grant. Any further discussion on that? All those in favor? And that's everybody, that's carried. On to other business. Council, we need to pass the following resolution to participate in the all council meeting on January 27th, 2023, hosted by the Region of Waterloo. Is there a mover and a seconder for that? Councillor Grant and Mayor Shantz. Any further discussion? Yes, Councillor Cadeau.
I'm just looking for direction on if we pass this resolution, is this a mandatory training at that point?
I will direct that to Clerk Smith.
Yes, thank you through you, Mr. Chair. The training is not mandatory. It's being organized by the Waterloo Region Clerks to allow for social media and communications training. We are looking at another opportunity, and then there'll also be some additional training that you'll see come forward throughout the rest of the year for all the councils where we feel we can pool our resources and deliver that training most efficiently as a group. So training is not mandatory for this one. However, the previous council did ask for equity, diversity, and inclusion training to be mandatory. So what I'll be doing is I'm reporting to council next week, actually, to ask you to reaffirm that direction, and then subject to your approval of that, some of the equity, diversity, and inclusion training will be mandatory. The rest is optional, and council can choose if they wish to go or not.
Mayor Shantz.
Thank you. I wonder if Clerk Smith could just explain to council why we need this motion.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to council. Your procedural bylaw requires you to meet within the township of Woolwich for any regular meeting, or pass a resolution if you're going to meet outside the township. So when you're meeting as all councils of the Region of Waterloo, it's sort of standard practice to pass a resolution to say we will meet with the other councils. This is also great notice that there is a discussion going on. In this case, it's a training session, but every once in a while throughout the term, there will be matters that the region or other municipalities convene an all council meeting, and there may be some cross-border or regional things that you're looking at those meetings.
All right. Is there a mover and a seconder for that? Councillor Bryant, and seconded by Councillor Grant. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor? That's unanimous, carried. All right, on to councillor reports. Councillor Bryant, I believe you have a request from staff. You can go ahead.
Thank you. I believe this one will be for Jared Poupet. My question is, can we do a survey of the residents in Mary Hill? We have an issue with, we've had 3 dug wells go dry in the past year. I'd like to have a survey done of the residents along the Mary Hill Road to see who would be willing to sign up to have the municipal water system, I guess, extended so that they have the ability to sign up, because if their wells go dry, it's a major expense for them. So if they have the ability to go on to something like this, then it will hopefully get them through the next, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 years. At any rate, I'm going to ask Jared for his input on this.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Burgess, to Councillor Bryant. So the township has engaged in what we call a special service levy survey. It is when we've looked to extend municipal servicing. It's done through the Municipal Act, Section 326, and it does provide council the ability to, in the absence of resident approval, it does provide the ability for council to extend municipal servicing at the cost of the benefiting properties, meaning those who are currently unserviced would then pay full freight for the extension of municipal servicing. And that can be water or wastewater servicing. In this case, in Maryhill, we know that there is no wastewater servicing, only potable water. And we do have unserviced area in Maryhill, which would be along the regional ownership piece from Notre Dame on Maryhill Road up to St. Charles, and then as well the piece that the township owns on Maryhill Road north of St. Charles up to I think Zinger Villa. So that is certainly something that staff could engage if that is council's desire, and we would just seek direction from the whole of council. And then what staff would do is prepare a survey to the residents just to engage what the interest in the community is, and staff would then report back the findings of that survey to council for a decision. We know that the region is preparing to do a road reconstruction on Maryhill Road in 2024. So there would be the potential for opportunity to expand municipal water servicing through that project. That would come at somewhat of a cost savings because they are lumping in some larger road reconstruction work as well. So that could be a benefit. There is no work planned north of St. Charles Street. So there would be really no subsidy opportunity for that portion. And again, that could be something that we could discuss further with council once we receive the results. And again, I think I want to remind council that typically staff have looked for consensus, or at least greater than 51% when writing a recommendation to council. However, I want council to be aware that one of the reasons the special service levy does exist is to ensure public health and safety. And that could come in the form of an order from the province to require that wells are decommissioned and that municipal servicing is extended, and that does provide council with that ability. So I just wanted to sort of bring all that to council's attention before they make a decision.
Just want to clarify with you, Maryhill Road, are we talking right from say St. Boniface School right down past St. Charles and down to where the bend is to Notre Dame?
That would be the unserviced area of Breslau, or sorry, of Maryhill.
Maryhill, yeah.
Yeah.
So that whole area would be included in the survey.
We would just include, yes, exactly. We would include the entire unserviced area of Maryhill, which would include, without getting into the detail, I haven't looked at the exact map, but my understanding is certainly there's a lot of unserviced properties along Maryhill Road, both north of St. Charles and south of St. Charles to Notre Dame.
Correct, that whole area. And would you be looking at St. Charles as well, west, because they are not a serviced area either?
Yep, we would definitely look for the extension of servicing. Yep, for that whole area.
So, sorry, thank you, Jared. Do I need to put it forward as a motion to get the support of council, or how would we do this? I'll go through you to possibly Clerk Smith, I guess.
I think, again, council can take this either through a resolution or by direction to staff. Unless Mr. Poupé has any other requests, I think you could either sort of do the typical thumbs up, nods of the head, or, you know, again, if the chair doesn't see consensus around the table, you could always bring forward a motion to that regard.
Is council in consensus? Everyone's good on that motion, it appears so. All right. That's good. Move ahead.
Direction received. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bryant and Mr. Poupé. Are there any other reports from council? All right, seeing none. Do we have any discussion on the outstanding activity list? Councillor Bryant.
Thank you. Do we have an update on the library as to what is happening with that for Breslau? Does anyone know?
CEO Brenneman.
Yeah, through you, Chair, to council. So it's still a live discussion between township recreation and community services staff. I've been involved as well, and library staff from the region. And again, just a reminder that in terms of how the library system works in our two-tier systems, we're obligated to provide the facilities and some other things related there too. And then the region operates the system. Although, you know, we can see great synergies in the future in terms of how our recreation and community services staff and library staff can work together to provide programs and services. So I don't have a time frame right now, but we are actively engaged trying to bring respective reports to both regional council and township council to gain the support. But I'll work with our recreation community services staff, perhaps to put an email update to council if there's any more specifics to provide in terms of timing. But as I said, it's a live conversation. And again, just I guess for the people watching, we are the live conversation is around the fact that we are looking at the community center, the Empire room in the downstairs area. And the region, you know, does see it as staff see it as acceptable space. We do as well. And so I think we really just have to work towards these two reports to go to the respective councils. But it certainly is something that will come forward in this particular year.
Thank you.
Councillor Cadeau.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, probably to Deputy Clerk Smith. I'm looking at a lot of what I see here, and there's some discussion dates here. I'm wondering if it could be to the benefit of council to get a package put together that just has some of the outcomes of these discussions, just so we're in a better position to speak to some of these outstanding activities. And perhaps that's to you, Director Smith.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll take that one if that's all right. Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think it's something that we could do. And I guess apologies because we did talk about this earlier, but just from a timing perspective, we're onboarding our new council committee facilitator, hopefully, and this might actually be a great orientation project for that person to sort of dig into the past decisions of council, and then you know, give council an update so you can see how these projects came about, and then you know, get the updates as they've come along. So definitely can work towards that. Could you give us a couple weeks?
Yeah, thanks. I know that we have had conversation around that. So just kind of getting it out there in the public forum and to the benefit of the rest of council. So thank you.
Any other discussion? All right, seeing none. There's no notice of motion. And then that brings us to our adjournment. Brings us to the end of our meeting. Is there anyone willing to move and second an adjournment? Councillor Schwint and seconded by Councillor Grant. All those in favor? And that's carried. In closing, council would like to say thank you to all who participated or tuned into the meeting tonight. Council, please stay connected on Zoom until the live stream has stopped. Good night, everyone.